The ICC, International Criminal Court, obviously from its actions and its efforts is quite anti-Semitic. The United States has no business supporting the efforts of those who support the effort and abuse of Israelis and the effort to eliminate them from off of the globe. If there had been an Israel during the Holocaust, Jews would have had a place to go, and there would not have been 6 million killed in the Holocaust. This is no time for anyone who cares about world peace and the avoidance of suffering to stand up and decry Israel. This is a time to stand with Israel. I would like to see, as some writers have suggested, that we withdraw from anything that might lend our support to the International Criminal Court because of its anti-Semitic views. And I realized as I was reading these articles about additional anti-Semitic effort by the UN.
The United Nations says that war crimes may have been committed by Israelis and by Palestinian militants during the conflict in Gaza last year. A UN report said there was evidence of serious violations by both sides. The 50-day conflict ended in a truce last August. On the Palestinian side, 2,251 people were killed, more than 1,400 were civilians, and more than 500 children. On the Israeli side, 67 soldiers were killed, along with 6 civilians. Yolande Nell has this report.
Over 50 days last summer, the Gaza Strip was pummeled by Israeli airstrikes and shelling. Israel says it was targeting tunnels used by Palestinian militants and trying to stop them firing volleys of missiles at its towns and cities. Now a report commissioned by the UN Human Rights Council says it's possible both sides committed war crimes. But Israel rejects the findings as biased. It says its actions in Gaza were meant to protect its civilians, and its own inquiries found it acted lawfully.
Israel is a democracy committed to the rule of law. Time and again it is forced to defend itself against Palestinian terrorists who commit a double war crime. They deliberately target civilians while deliberately hiding behind Palestinian civilians.
Today in Gaza, the Hamas authorities said the report created a false equality between victims and their killers. The war left widespread destruction across Gaza, and some 2,200 Palestinians were killed. The UN says most were civilians, but Israel disputes that. On the Israeli side, 73 were killed, mostly soldiers.
The UN investigators weren't able to come here to Gaza to see scenes like this for themselves and to meet the residents because Israel refused to cooperate with them. At the same time, there's been a lot of criticism over how Israel carried out its own inquiries into attacks that killed Palestinian civilians.
Where?
This was one of the most controversial incidents of the war. 4 cousins aged 9 to 11 were killed by Israeli missiles while playing on the beach. The UN commissioners criticised the Israeli army's inquiry, which cleared its soldiers of any wrongdoing. Now this grieving father says Palestinian leaders have promised him justice. We'll go after Israel in all international institutions, even the International Criminal Court, he tells me. We're not going to let Israel escape. It's calm now on the Gaza beachfront, almost a year on from the fierce fighting. But with further investigations underway, the bitter debate about whether war crimes were committed here is set to continue. Yolande Nell, BBC News, Gaza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has been a tough week for all Christians in the country. Have lost 3 brothers and 6 sisters in the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. The whole country mourns. Well, probably not everybody. Evil has those who support it, wallow in it, as did the evil perpetrator of the killings. So our prayers continue to go out to the immediate family members, to the church family members, for their peace and for their comfort, because those of us who are believers know that those we've lost are at the foot of the Savior in paradise. And I learned today the President will be going to speak at the funeral. And I recall a speech in Arizona. And so as I encouraged our prayer caucus tonight, we should be praying for the President to be a uniter as he speaks. And I thought about the way a great president named Abraham Lincoln concluded his second inaugural address. The war was not over. There was great hatred and bitterness. Of course, he mentioned in his inaugural address, talking about North and South, both read the same Bible, both pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. And he goes on to give what is one of the great theological treatises on the nature of God, quotes from the Old Testament a couple of times. But with all the killing that had occurred during the Civil War, he ended trying to encourage uniting. And I know there are those who advise the President that he should not let a good crisis go to waste. But for many of us, the hope and prayer is that this week's funeral, he will be a uniter. Lincoln closed his second inaugural with the words, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." That was a man who sought to unite, who knew there was a Heavenly Father to whom we could pray and who would answer our prayers. I hope and pray that will be the outcome at the funeral of my brothers and sisters in Charleston, South Carolina. Of course, then there's the judge side of me, having sentenced people both to prison and to death. The judge side of me says, from what we know, sure cries out for the death penalty. But we'll let justice system in South Carolina take care of that. In the meantime, as we think about injustice, it's also hard not to think of our friends, our allies in Israel, who have trouble finding any friends. They're persecuted on every side. Then we get this report from the UN, an article talking about it from Marisa Newman. The Times of Israel. Israel slams politically motivated, and morally flawed UN Gaza report. The article says Israel on Monday said it would seriously evaluate the United Nations Human Rights Council inquiry on the Gaza conflict, while politicians from left and right slammed the international body for bias and declared that the international investigators lacked access to evidence. The article goes on down further. The report is biased, said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in response. Israel is not perpetrating war crimes, but rather protecting itself from an organization that carries out war crimes. We won't sit back with our arms crossed as our citizens are attacked by thousands of missiles. It's his quote. The article says the Human Rights Council, quote, in practice, does everything but worry about human rights, unquote, the Prime Minister charged. Quote, the Commission spends more time condemning Israel than Iran, Syria, and North Korea put together, unquote. Well, and it seems that these are the times that cry out for moral, pragmatic, and unified response to the anti-Semitism that's growing. It's just unbelievable. In Europe, in the United States, colleges and universities, it's incredible. I mean, the Bible talks about times when right will be wrong and wrong will be right. Perhaps we're entering such an era, but for a country like Israel to be under attack on virtually every front, every side, and to have Palestinians, radical Islamists, Iranians who declare that they will see that it is annihilated, leaders of whom make statements such as, we're glad that they're gathered in Israel so that we can annihilate them all at once. And the UN basically sees somehow level parties on the same plane, terrorists and people who promote democratic beliefs, carry them out, allow people to vote, believe in the rights of women, believe in equal rights, place where Muslims can freely vote and don't have to worry about a radical Islamist killing them if he or she doesn't believe and perform exactly like their radical Islamist leader tells them to. The article says the foreign ministry, talking about the Israeli foreign ministry, also castigated the UN Human Rights Council investigation for failing to distinguish between the Israeli military and Hamas. Quote, it is regrettable that the report fails to recognize the profound difference between Israel's moral behavior during Operation Protective Edge and the terror organizations it confronted, unquote. Likud minister Yuval Steinitz compared the conflict to a Palestinian suicide bomber commandeering a bus full of Palestinian civilians and ramming it into an Israeli tank. Many Palestinian civilians would die, he told Army Radio, but that doesn't mean the tank is to blame. The UN panel's approach was absurd, he said, in that it would require Israel not to fire back when terrorists fire at its civilians, because the terrorists are hiding behind their civilians. Steinitz also said the UN Human Rights Commission's obsessive focus on Israel points to anti-Semitism. Asked whether Israel would have done better to cooperate with the panel, he said, you can't explain to people who are not prepared to listen. Yes, Leader Yair Lapid also rejected the idea that Israel should have cooperated, saying the panel had drawn its conclusions before it even began its probe. And it goes on to discuss the report from the so-called Human Rights Council. The United Nations Human Rights Council is an abomination. It should be an affront, as it is an outrage to anyone who cares about human rights. So what's happened at the United Nations? We have had so many nations join the United Nations that don't care about human rights. They don't care about women. Of course, they're so brutal in the treatment of those who would oppose it that apparently it scares off feminist groups who are afraid to attack those who really are inhumane in their treatment of women. Enough so, the feminist liberal groups are afraid to take them on. But hopefully someday they'll gain the courage to see where women are truly being abused in horrendous ways, and they'll join with some of the rest of us in trying to stop that instead of going after Christian groups or groups who believe that everyone once conceived should have a right to live. Maybe some of those groups, if they quit attacking those who are pro-life and spend a little time attacking those who are true abusers of women, we'd find common footing and we'd be able to work better together. Another article here from Ann Bayevsky. This one, headline, UN report denies Israel's right of self-defense, advocates arrest of Israelis instead. It really is outrageous, and the United States should, as has been suggested by some writers, we should withdraw from participation in the Human Rights Commission. The ICC, International Criminal Court, obviously from its actions and its efforts is quite anti-Semitic. The United States has no business supporting the efforts of those who support the effort and abuse of Israelis and the effort to eliminate them from off of the globe. If there had been an Israel during the Holocaust, Jews would have had a place to go, and there would not have been 6 million killed in the Holocaust. This is no time for anyone who cares about world peace and the avoidance of suffering to stand up and decry Israel. This is a time to stand with Israel. An actual democratic republic in the middle of the Middle East respects women like no nation around in the Middle East, supports the value of life and private property. How in the world are we not a better friend to them? I would like to see, as some writers have suggested, that we withdraw from anything that might lend our support to the International Criminal Court because of its anti-Semitic views. And I realized as I was reading these articles about additional anti-Semitic effort by the UN. Look, the UN has been overtaken by so many countries. They don't believe in human rights for their people, so many of them. They're abusive. have no problem with torturing those with whom they disagree, have no problem killing people who convert from, for example, from Islamic beliefs to Christian beliefs, gets the death penalty in some of these countries. You know, it's time to begin a new organization of democratic republics that respect the rights of women, men, children, and have elections, fair elections. Let's have an international community like that, an international group, so that when it speaks, it's not with blood dripping off of the votes of its members. It would mean something. A Human Rights Commission, for example, for a while had Libya as the head. You kidding me? This is outrageous. So, Mr. Speaker, I realized in reviewing these articles, I have not yet filed my bill that I normally file, the UN Voting Accountability Act. And what I've learned around this body, you keep filing a bill long enough, and even if it requires somebody else putting their name on it to get it to the floor, you get that done, you get it passed, you don't care who gets the credit. But the UN Voting Accountability Bill is very simple. Basically says any nation that votes against the United States more than half of the time in the preceding year will get no assistance from the United States of any kind whatsoever. As I've said for years, you don't have to pay people to hate you. They'll do it for free. It's still true. So it's time to leave that money here. It's time for this administration to stop sending weapons that it knows have continuously fallen in the hands of the Islamic State and made it extremely difficult for the courageous Kurdish fighters to fight and defeat the radical Islamist state. Let's start sending those weapons directly to the Kurds. Baghdad's not letting them get them. And they cannot easily defeat the weapons, the up-armored vehicles, the things that we've sent that we knew ultimately were falling into Islamic State hands. And as some Muslim friends, leaders in Middle Eastern states have continued to ask, why is it that the United States administration keeps helping the Muslim Brotherhood? Don't they know that's who is at war with the United States? Why do you keep helping your enemies, they ask. It's time that we quit helping our enemies. It's time that we help those here at home. I applaud our conference passing the bills we did tonight. One is going to make it easier for seniors to get access to the health care that Obamacare has made it very difficult for them to get. So there is some good news, and our prayers continue so that by the end of the week there will be even better news. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
I move that we do now combine.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.